I always thought I understood power, how it moved, how it hid behind polished smiles and boardroom promises. But nothing prepared me for the moment I realized the people I trusted most weren't just undermining me, they were quietly preparing to erase me. One decision, one signature, one whispered conversation behind a closed door, and suddenly my career, my reputation, even the client I'd fought tooth and nail to win were slipping from my hands like they'd never belonged to me at all. I remember standing in that dim elevator, the city lights blurring through the metal seams, feeling the weight of a truth I didn't want to face. They had planned this. They had used me. And they expected me to walk away quietly, grateful for whatever scraps they decided to leave behind. But what they didn't know was that the client they were trying to steal wasn't just a contract to me. It was my leverage, my lifeline. And the betrayal they thought would break me only sharpened the part of me they should have feared from the start. Because in that moment, heart pounding, betrayal still burning in my throat, I made a decision that would shift every power dynamic they relied on. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Do you want to know how I turned their perfect plan into the beginning of their downfall? Before everything unraveled, my life looked exactly the way I had always imagined it would, structured, ambitious, and moving in a direction that felt like progress. I woke up each morning before the sun rose, the city still half asleep beneath my apartment windows, and I'd savor those quiet minutes before the world demanded anything from me. My routine was more than a habit, it was a rhythm that kept me steady. Gym at 6, coffee at 7, and then straight into the chaos of the consulting firm where I had carved out a place for myself through sheer grit and an ability to read people faster than they realized. I wasn't born into privilege or connections. Every step I took in that firm was a fight upward, and I wore my resilience like armor. The partners knew me as the woman who delivered results even when the odds weren't on my side. They praised my work ethic, my discipline, my hunger, words that sounded flattering on the surface, but sometimes carried an undertone I couldn't quite name. Still, I pushed ahead, believing that if I kept proving myself, I'd eventually reach a point where I no longer had to. Outside of work, life was simpler. I kept a tight circle of friends, people who grounded me when the corporate world tried to swallow me whole. Our Friday dinners were the closest thing I had to ritual, laughter echoing across restaurant tables, the comfort of familiar faces, the relief of not having to perform. Sometimes, on quieter weekends, I'd wander through bookstores or take long walks through the city, letting my thoughts breathe. I didn't realize then how much I relied on those moments, how much I needed that contrast between the intensity of my work and the softness of everything else. The firm itself had its own personality, sleek glass conference rooms, polished smiles, and an undercurrent of competition that never fully disappeared. But I learned how to navigate those waters early on. I learned when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to push back. And for the most part, I felt like I was finally gaining momentum. My projects were high-profile, my responsibilities were growing, and there was talk, whispers really, that I was being considered for a senior role sooner than expected. Then came the client. The client that would change everything. It started as just another pitch, an ambitious one, of course, but nothing I hadn't handled before. A billion-dollar opportunity that could shift the firm's entire trajectory. I threw myself into it with the kind of focus that shuts out everything else. Early mornings blurred into late nights, and I could feel the weight of expectation from every direction. But there was also something exhilarating about it. Something that made me feel like I was finally standing on the edge of the future I'd been building toward for years. And when I won them, when the client looked across the table, nodded slowly, and said they wanted me, it felt like validation for every sacrifice I had ever made. Yet the celebration was strangely muted. People smiled, congratulated me, raised glasses in my honor, but beneath the surface was a tension I couldn't quite explain. A stiffness in certain shoulders. A flicker of something guarded in the eyes of people who were normally warm. Conversations paused when I entered the rooms. A partner who had always been perfectly cordial began watching me with an intensity that didn't feel like admiration. I brushed it off at first. Stress, I told myself. Pressure. Jealousy, maybe. big wins always stirred emotions in competitive environments. But then there were signs I couldn't ignore: documents I wasn't copied on, meetings held without me, decisions made that contradicted my direction. Subtle, quiet, easy to overlook shifts that made little sense individually, but together formed the shape of something darker. Something intentional. Still, I kept moving forward, unwilling to believe that the ground beneath me was already cracking. Because in my mind, success was supposed to protect me. I didn't realize yet that it was the very thing that made me a target. And the people smiling at me from across that glass-walled office knew something I didn't, something that would soon turn my carefully built world inside out. I didn't realize how quickly things were shifting until the ground finally gave way beneath me. At first, the changes were small, so small I kept convincing myself they were normal. A meeting moved without explanation. A document edited after I submitted the final version. A client call I wasn't invited to, even though I was the one who had brought them in. I told myself they were logistical oversights, nothing more. But the unease crept in like a slow leak, filling the spaces between my thoughts. The first real fracture appeared on a Tuesday morning when I walked into the office and noticed the way people paused mid-conversation as I passed. Not the typical competitive atmosphere I'd grown used to, something heavier, something concealed behind polite smiles. When I reached my desk, I found a printed packet waiting for me. I flipped through it and realized it was a summary of the client's latest requests. Requests I had never received. Requests that had already been passed on to another team. My team. A team that now wasn't reporting to me. It felt like a warning I hadn't asked for, a reminder that decisions were being made in rooms I wasn't allowed to enter anymore. I thought about going straight to the partners, but something held me back. Instinct, maybe. A tiny voice telling me that I needed to understand the full shape of the game before I made a move. Over the next week, the silence grew louder. My access to certain documents was suddenly restricted. Invitations to strategy sessions were, accidentally, left off my calendar. And the partners, men who had once shaken my hand firmly, confidently, barely made eye contact with me. Then came the moment that changed everything. I had stayed late to finalize a report, the office nearly empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. On my way out, I passed one of the glass-walled conference rooms. The lights were dim, but I saw shadows, familiar silhouettes huddled together. I would have kept walking, but a phrase drifted out as I passed. She won't see it coming. My steps faltered. I moved back just enough to remain out of sight, my heart pounding as I registered the voices. The senior partner, the operations director, and worst of all, the colleague I had mentored for years, the one I had trusted without hesitation. I stayed absolutely still, breath caught in my chest, as pieces of their conversation came together. They weren't just sidelining me. They were preparing a full transition of the client to another lead. My client, the one I had brought in, the one who chose me. But that wasn't the part that hollowed me out. It was what came next. And once the contract is updated, we won't need her anymore. She'll walk right into it. A beat of laughter followed, small, cold, callous. My vision blurred for a second. My hands shook. I felt something inside me harden into a sharp, unbreakable point. I stepped back quietly, forcing myself not to react, not to breathe too loudly. If I made a sound, if I revealed myself, the element of surprise, my only weapon, would vanish. I left the office with that sentence echoing in my mind, each repetition adding another layer to the fury unraveling inside me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every smile, every congratulatory pat on the back after winning the client. I had thought I was finally being recognized. Instead, I was being groomed for replacement, for removal, for erasure. The realization was devastating, but it lit something in me, a fire that pushed past hurt, past disbelief, past fear. They had chosen to underestimate me. They had mistaken my loyalty for blindness. So I decided to stop giving them the courtesy of assuming they were acting in good faith. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a new calm. I kept my head down and observed. Every whisper, Every glance, every shift in dynamics became data. I tracked who communicated with whom, who got tense when I entered a room, who avoided my gaze entirely. And slowly, a map of their plan began to form in my mind. They were preparing a revised contract that would reassign the client under the pretense of organizational restructuring. Once signed, the deal and all credit and control would be moved away from me. Worse, they planned to pin any fallout on me, citing performance issues and misalignment with firm strategy. It wasn't just betrayal. It was sabotage. Still, I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because I had discovered something they didn't know. The client trusted me more than they trusted the firm. And trust, I realized, was leverage, something more powerful than any document or signature. But I needed proof. Something that couldn't be spun or twisted. Something undeniable. And I found it, not through some grand investigation, but in the quietest, most unexpected way. My mentee, the one who had turned on me. He had left his laptop unlocked. It was only for a few seconds, but it was enough. Enough for me to see an email drafting the transition plan, listing out every step they intended to take to phase me out. Enough to see attachments, slides, analyses, data, all of which were built off my work, my efforts, my long nights, my expertise. They were going to cut me out using the very things I had created. I took photos quietly, quickly, methodically. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't break. I planned. I crafted messages. I organized evidence. I rehearsed conversations I needed to have with the client. I mapped out the exact timing of each step. Their plan relied on one assumption, that I wouldn't act until it was too late. But they were wrong. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with the client, not through the firm, but directly. It was a risky move, one that could get me fired if discovered. But I knew it was the only way to retain control. The client agreed immediately, unaware of the corporate storm brewing behind closed doors. When we met, I laid out everything, not the emotions, not the anger, but the facts. Clean, sharp, undeniable. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief to quiet, simmering irritation. Not at me, but at the firm. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for my career. I was fighting to expose them, to break the system they thought they had mastered, to turn their weapon back on them. Because if they wanted a war, they were about to get one. And I hadn't even made my first move. I walked into the office that morning knowing it would be the last time I stepped through those glass doors as someone they believed they controlled. The air was too still, the lights too bright, and the forced greetings felt like tiny fractures in the calm I had carefully constructed. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Fear had burned itself out days ago, replaced by something sharper, cold, unshakable purpose. I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to end them. The partners had scheduled a performance review, a meeting that had conveniently appeared after they realized the client meeting had happened without their knowledge. They didn't know what was said in that private conversation. They didn't know the client had already made a decision. And they didn't know that today, their carefully crafted plan was about to implode. I entered the boardroom and found them already seated, for partners, each with a stiff smile, each pretending this was routine. But there was tension around their eyes, a tightness in their posture. They felt the shift. They just didn't know where it was coming from. I took my seat without a word. One partner cleared his throat, flipping open a folder with exaggerated calm. "We've been reviewing your recent performance and..." I placed my phone on the table, screen facing up. The room fell silent. On the screen was the first slide of the transition plan they had secretly written, the one outlining how they would remove me from the client account. The color drained from their faces. "I thought," I said softly, "you might want to review this instead." For a moment, just a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the slide automatically shifted to the next one, projected timeline for full reassignment, followed by messaging strategy for attributing responsibility to her. The operations director's hands twitched. The junior partner's mouth fell open in a small, sharp gasp. I didn't speak. I let the silence pull them apart. Finally, one of them, Steely, composed, the one who always thought he could outmaneuver anyone, leaned forward. "Where did you get that?" I met his stare without blinking. "It doesn't matter." The screen shifted again. Another slide. A recommendation. Prepare documentation to suggest she is unaligned with firm vision and client needs. The room's walls seemed to shrink. Their faces, once confident, now flickered with panic, shallow breaths, tightening jaws, darting eyes. They hadn't expected the confrontation to come this early. They hadn't expected me to come armed. But this wasn't the climax. This was only the beginning. I leaned back slightly. "Before any of you say a word, the client has also seen this." That was the moment the room collapsed into chaos. 3 of them began talking at once, stuttering half-sentences, excuses, denials. One stood up, pacing, swearing under his breath. The senior partner froze, realization dripping into his features like poison. "You went behind us?" he asked, voice low. "No," I said. "I went to the people who deserved the truth." He suddenly understood, too late, that I had done more than expose their plan. I had flipped the power dynamic they relied on. I had taken away the very asset they wanted. Because the client wasn't just angry. The client was done. I opened my bag, pulled out a neat stack of documents, and placed them on the table. "This," I said, "is the termination notice. Effective immediately." Their eyes widened, horrified. "The client has chosen to withdraw all business from the firm." A strangled noise escaped someone on the far end of the table. Another partner sank into his chair, face paling. The senior partner's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle pulsing in his cheek. "And," I continued, "they've asked me to continue leading their account, independently." The room erupted again, shouts, accusations, disbelief. For once, I didn't flinch. I watched them unravel, each word they hurled at one another proof that their so-called unity had always been a fragile performance. I stood slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle over all of us. "You thought you could erase me," I said. "You thought you could take what I built and claim it as your own. But you underestimated the one thing you never bothered to understand." They looked up, confused, angry, and desperate. I let the silence sharpen my next words. "Loyalty doesn't come from fear. It comes from trust. And the client trusted me more than they ever trusted this place." The senior partner slammed his fist against the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "You've destroyed everything." "No," I replied. "You destroyed yourselves." I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I paused and looked back. There was one final piece of my revenge, one they didn't know yet. "You'll be contacted by the board," I said. "They've been informed of your scheme. Every document, every email, every meeting." The blood drained from their faces a second time. Their reputations, the thing they valued more than ethics, more than people, more than truth, were about to be shredded, not by rumors or whispers, but by their own signatures. I walked out of that boardroom feeling nothing and everything all at once. Anger, relief, power, grief, triumph. My hands trembled, but my stride was steady. The hallway felt different. Lighter. Like the very building had released a breath it had been holding for years. I didn't look back. And yet, as I reached the elevator, my heart thudded with a single question, one that lingered in the space between who I had been and who I was becoming. Now that I've taken everything back, what was I going to do with the freedom I had just won? In the days that followed, everything moved with a strange quietness, as if the world was giving me space to breathe after months of suffocating under other people's ambitions. The firm scrambled to contain the fallout, but the truth spread faster than they could manage. Meetings were called. Statements were drafted. Reputations, theirs, not mine, began to splinter under the weight of their own deceit. I watched it all from a distance, not out of spite, but out of a feeling I hadn't expected: detachment. I wasn't celebrating their downfall. I wasn't savoring their panic. I was simply done. The client and I finalized the paperwork quietly. No grand announcements, no boastful declarations. Just a clean, decisive break from the people who had built their power on the backs of those they believed were disposable. I rented a small office with worn wooden floors and a view of nothing more than the street below. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decision, every inch of the space felt like a reclamation of something I had lost without realizing it. Autonomy. The first morning I sat at my new desk, sunlight spilling across the papers, I felt a weight lift from my chest, a weight I'd carried for so long that I didn't know what life felt like without it. There was no one waiting to take credit for my work, no one monitoring my progress, no one shaping my future in secret meetings I wasn't invited to. My success, from that point on, would be made by my own hands. But revenge never ends in one moment. It unfolds gradually, just like healing. In the weeks that followed, former colleagues reached out. Some apologized. Some begged for explanations. Some pretended they had always been on my side. I listened politely, but didn't give any of them what they were seeking. Closure isn't something you hand to people who betrayed you. It's something you build for yourself, piece by piece. The partners faced consequences far more severe than they had ever expected. Investigations. Suspensions. One resigned quietly. Another was removed by the board. Their downfall wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet, clinical, unavoidable. A dismantling of influence, one decision at a time. And yet, a strange truth emerged. Destroying them didn't fix everything inside me. Yes, I had reclaimed my power. Yes, I had protected what I built. Yes, I had walked away with a client they thought they controlled. But the scars remained. Not as open wounds, but as reminders. Reminders of how easily trust can be manipulated, how ambition can twist loyalty into something unrecognizable, how people with everything still want more, even if they have to tear someone else apart to get it. Still, something unexpected happened too. I learned what it meant to rebuild, not just a career but a sense of self. I learned to take up space without apologizing. I learned to trust my instincts, even when they told me something I didn't want to hear. And I learned that revenge isn't about destroying the other person. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. My new firm grew faster than I expected. The client introduced me to others. Opportunities began appearing like stepping stones in the path I thought had been shattered. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up exhausted or anxious or bracing for the next blow. I woke up curious, hungry, free. But here's the part that stayed with me the most, the part one didn't anticipate. Revenge gave me clarity, not satisfaction. Power, not peace. A beginning, not an ending. And maybe that's the truth we don't talk about enough. We think revenge is a single moment, a final strike, a decisive victory. But it's not. It's a transformation. It's the moment you stop letting someone else write your story. It's the decision to walk away from the wreckage and start building something stronger. Even now, when I walk past the old office building, I feel a mixture of sadness and strength. They tried to erase me. Instead, they made me impossible to ignore. Their betrayal became the catalyst for the life I should have been living all along. And when I think back to the version of myself who stayed awake at night wondering if I was imagining the signs, if I was overreacting, if I was worth fighting for, I wish I could tell her something simple. You were right to fight. You were right to leave. And you were right to rise. Because in the end, revenge didn't change them. It changed me. So now I ask you, the one listening, maybe remembering your own betrayal, your own quiet hurt, your own moment of being underestimated. When someone tries to take everything you've built, how far will you go to take yourself back?